Long ago, about 1863, right here in our town of Westford, there lived a little boy named Freddy Fisher. Freddy was 7 years old and loved to keep busy all the time. But when his older brothers and sisters were in school and his daily chores were all finished, Freddy grew tired of playing by himself. He grew tired of his toys and tired of his books and tired of his playthings. He wasn't very happy. One autumn day, Freddy asked his mother, "Mother, what can I do now? What do you think he said? I'm bored." So his mother, who always knew wonderful things for little boys to do, calmly replied, "Well, Freddy, let me see. I know. You can go on a special journey to find a little red house with no doors and no windows and a star inside." "Mother, can you please say that again?" "Of course. Say it with me if you like. You want to find a little red house with no doors and no windows and a star inside." Well, this little boy's eyes grew wide with wonder. "Wow, that sounds like fun! But where should I go to look?" "Well, Freddy, you might go down the road past the farmer's house and up and over the big hill." So Freddy put on his favorite hat and jacket, kissed his mother goodbye, and headed down the road towards Fletcher's Stony Brook farm. He came to a big white barn. Freddy could hear moo, moo, lots of cows and bok, 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 lots of hens and chickens. There, lined up beside a large wooden wagon, were barrels of brown potatoes and baskets of yellow squash and plump orange pumpkins, ready to go to market. Standing in the doorway of the barn was a big man named Willard Fletcher. He was examining a new pitchfork he'd just purchased from a store in Forge Village. Freddy walked up and asked, "Excuse me, Farmer Fletcher, do you know where I can find a little red house with no doors and no windows and a star inside?" Farmer Fletcher chuckled to himself. "Well there, young Mr. Fisher, I've lived a great many years in my time, but I've never seen a house like that. Tell you what, son, you go over the railroad tracks and across Stony Brook and head up Depot Road to Swallow's General Store. And there you ask Granny that same question. Why, Granny's so clever, she knows how to make the best pumpkin pies and blueberry jam and knit warm woolen mittens. I'm sure Granny can tell you." So the little boy thanked Farmer Fletcher and walked all the way up Depot Hill, first passing Cold Spring Farm on his right, and then on his left, passing by Old Homestead Farm, which is now the location of Abbott School. When Freddy reached the top of the steep hill, he arrived at the center of Westford. Right in front of him was Town Common, and Freddy smiled when he saw a whole flock of sheep grazing on the green. Across the dirt road on his right was Swallow's General Store. Oh, Freddy loved going to the general store because it was fun to look at all the goodies for sale. And Mr. Swallow, the owner, was famous for treating the kids to free gumdrops and licorice candy. Granny was sitting behind the counter in her rocking chair, knitting a red mitten. She was as wrinkled as a walnut, but her warm smile lit up her face. Freddy walked up to her and asked, "Hello, Granny. Please, do you know where I can find a little red house with no doors and no windows and a star inside?" Well, Granny laughed so hard, her ball of red yarn rolled right off her lap. "Oh, I would love to find that little house myself, Mr. Fisher. It certainly would be warm and cozy inside. But I'm afraid I can't help you, dear.
Perhaps Mrs. Abbott would know. Or you might be able to catch her next door at the church. Here, before you go, help yourself to a few chewy gumdrops.
Freddy tipped his hat politely. "Thank you, Granny," and headed next door to First Church, also known as the Meeting House. Well, Mrs. Abbott and Mrs. Cameron were coming out the front of the church and were so busy talking they nearly bumped right into the little boy. "Oh, for heaven's sakes, where did you come from, young Freddy?" "Excuse me, I didn't mean to startle you both, but maybe you can help me find something. I've been searching everywhere to find a little red house with no doors and no windows and a star inside. Do you know where it is?" The two women shrugged, and Mrs. Abbott replied, "I'm afraid we can't help you either. Now, if Mr. Abbott were here, he might know. He knows just about everything in Westford. But today, he's at the Abbott Mills." "What about Mr. Healy? Why, he has so many customers in town. Surely he must know where that red house is." So Freddy tipped his hat to the ladies and walked across Town Common, heading towards the Blacksmith Shop. He wondered if his mother, who usually knew almost everything, had perhaps made a mistake about this unusual little red house. Frank Healy the blacksmith was busy crafting a new harness for George Wright the farmer. He peered up from his work as Freddy entered the blacksmith shop. "Excuse me, Mr. Healy, but can you please tell me where I can find a little red house with no doors and no windows and a star inside?" Mr. Healy smiled to himself. Now a house like that sure would be something to see. But I've never seen one of 'em around here. You better go ask down the road at the schoolhouse." "Thanks for your time. That sure is a strong harness you're making. Well, bye." And slowly down the Boston Road Freddy went, his feet starting to hurt a little. As he walked, he heard some sounds. Clip, 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 clop, clip, 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 clop, clip, 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 clop, and turned to see a team of big horses pulling a large wagon. This wagon was loaded with blocks of shiny gray granite from one of the quarries in town. Freddy thought, must be on its way to Quincy Market in Boston. And he waved to the driver, who was known as a teamster. A little further down the Boston Road, on his left, was Schoolhouse Number 1. Out front were two pleasant young girls skipping rope in the sunshine. They were Ellen Swallow and her best friend, Ada Day. "Hello, girls. Can you please help me? Do you know where I can find a little red house with no doors and no windows and a star inside?" The girls stopped a moment, and Ellen replied, "No, I sure don't know of any house like that. Sorry." So Freddy turned and started to head back home. But just then, a huge gust of wind came out of nowhere and began blowing the leaves in little circles. Ada Day laughed. "Hey, maybe you should ask the wind. The wind is so old and wise. He seems to know much more than we do. Maybe Mr. Wind can help you." No sooner had she said this than the wind whipped all around Freddy, and with a huge gust, whisked his hat right off his head and blew it down the Boston Road. Freddy called, "Hey, Mr. Wind, wait up!" Freddy laughed as he ran down the hill, chasing after his hat. When he reached the bottom of the hill, he stopped to pick up his hat. But before he could reach it, that playful Mr. Wind blew his hat into the orchard. Do you know what an orchard is? It's a place with lots of fruit trees. Well, on the left side of the orchard, there was a large painted sign at the entrance. It said, "Drew Farms." Mr. Drew owned the largest working apple orchard in Westford for generations. Freddy chased his hat into the orchard and found it lying on some soft grass underneath one of the trees. He walked over and picked up his hat, and there, underneath it, was a beautiful red apple. It was a Macintosh apple, and it was huge. Freddy carefully picked up the apple, and it filled both of his hands. It was so red, it looked like it had been painted red, and its thick brown stem stood straight up like a little chimney. It was shiny and smooth. It had no doors and no windows. Could there be a star inside? I wonder. So Freddy took out his pocket knife, which most boys were allowed to carry in those days, and he carefully sliced the apple in two halves. He stared at its center. Wow, Mother was right. There, inside the apple, lay a star holding tiny brown seeds. Freddy was so happy and relieved to solve this mystery. And he was a lucky boy indeed, because just then one of Farmer Fletcher's horse-drawn wagons was heading up the Boston Road on its way back from Parker Village. The driver recognized Freddy and stopped his wagon. It was Ephraim Fletcher, and he was happy to give Freddy a ride home. Well, Freddy couldn't wait to show his mother the apple and tell her he finally found his little red house with no doors and no windows and a star inside. And do you know that from that day on, young Freddy Fisher rarely announced that he was bored, because he knew he lived in a great town where there was always something interesting to do. And he had also learned a valuable lesson. Happiness, just like the star in the apple, really does come from the inside.